for me, I in my mind, I'm seeing bubble hash. I know what that means, right? But then I also don't understand, other than you having described, like, oh, that you're only using this particular part and you're not using a solvent or blah, blah, blah. Like, maybe give us, before you continue on, an understanding of what is bubble hash and what makes bubble hash bubble hash.
Okay. For clarification, what we call bubble hash right now, for the most part, is ice water bubble hash. However, you can have bubble hash as a terminology for hash that bubbles, that was made via dry sift, if you're in some place like Afghanistan or Lebanon or Morocco. So they don't really do the ice water bubble hash making process. However, the top grade hash that bubbles, they call that bubble hash. What I'm saying that I make is an ice water collection process, which is using agitation of water and ice in a washing machine or by hand to physically knock off the heads. Well, using centrifugal force, have the heads break off of the stalk. Then after it has been broken off from the stalk and allowed to collected in water, a series of sieves or bubble bags are used to differentiate the different sizes of heads. When we say heads, we're talking about trichome heads. Mm-hmm. So the bubble bag system goes from 25 up to 220. 220 collects your trash, and everything after that is not necessarily different grades. And that's a misnomer that's said often. It's not necessarily different grades, but rather different sizes. However, your finest grade will often be found in really three particular sizes: 73, 90, and 120, or equivalent. Because I say equivalent, some bags are, instead of a 73, it's a 70. It's always a 90, and that 120 might be a 130 or something. But that around that range is where you generally find the sweetest, what they call the sweet spot. That means the terpenes are fully formed, the cannabinoids are fully formed, your flavor, the melt is going to be the nicest, and everything outside of that is a kind of hit or miss of whether it's going to be phenomenal bubble hash. However, like I said, I'm always stressing when people say, oh, this is lower grade because it's 45. No, I've seen 45 being much better than 73. So that's the bubble hash making process. Ice and water, agitating on material, which separates the trichome heads, which drains down into a series of sieves, which then is dried and then consumed. That's the whole process with regard to what bubble hash is there. Coming back to the anatomy, sometimes we have some issues with getting, not sometimes, the market right now wants very, very light hash. Because the market wants very light hash, people circumvent that problem by pulling their plants maybe 2 or 3 weeks early.
Light as in like lightly colored, or light as in
yes, light color.
Okay, yeah.
No, lightly colored, like white, light pale yellow. They want it as light as possible. There's a misconception that means it's better. The problem with that is that the color of resin is due to a variety of factors. Again, whether it was indoor or outdoor, what the cultivar is, whether it was grown to full term or not, how it was stored, whether it's fresh frozen, and how it was processed. These are a lot of factors that when you're talking to the average person, they're not thinking of all those things. All they know is dark is bad. And dark is bad comes from when BHO was first being done in the early 2000s, when people would blast, that's the terminology for using BHO, blast trim, like old trim, it would, because of BHO's nature of leaching everything, it would bring this really awful brown color with awful flavor of, senesced heads that have died, material that's just bad quality and all of that. So the market says dark is bad. Of course, that makes no sense because people who have been smoking hash in the 60s, 70s, 80s, yes, everyone definitely talks about Lebanese blonde, but there have been a variety of hashes that people have been loving. I mean, Afghani hash that I had last year that was 20 years old was black as tar, and the flavor was ridiculously amazing, and the melt was 100%. So it really is a market issue. Again, so people still, however, you go to the store, you don't know better, want light hash. Growers are unfortunately taking their plants down a little bit early. And the problem with that is that although BHO can make use of that, when you're making stuff like bubble or dry sift, those heads end up being not full of oil. So you might spend all that time collecting, and then when at the end of the day, when it's time to weigh it out, it feels light, and then when it's time to dab it, there's nothing there, or consume it in some other way, there's nothing there. So we have a constant fight with the market, and education is really where we stand with that. Coming into full spectrum, and again, that has its own two meanings here. And the two meanings in full spectrum was first being said about hash makers, bubble hash makers who were combining their various microns of heads so that they had a fuller view of what the plant produces. See, the plant doesn't just have like all one size heads. It has some little heads. It has some really, really fat heads. So when you wash the plant, you're getting a variety of flavors because the terpene content you have in something that might be a small 25 micron head is going to be different than the terpene content that you have in a 160 head, right? So there was this differentiation made between people who are willing to capture that full flavor as opposed to people who do single micron. Single micron, it's like, again, you see I said the 73, the 90, the 120 are thought to be the sweet spot. So what happens is hash makers realize, okay, my 90 micron is the prettiest color. The flavor is so phenomenal. So I'm just going to separate out and sell these individually rather than possibly muddying the flavor, even though this whole plant tasted great as a whole smoke. But for the clarification of flavor, a lot of these single micron products have been created. Full spectrum means not doing that and mixing all your microns together. However, in CBD, and that only came in within the last 3 years, full spectrum, it's called whole plant full spectrum, is when you make CBD from all parts of the hemp plant. See, those two things don't even have anything to do with each other. One is about head size, but it's the same terminology, so it's a little bit problematic. What is happening? So with the CBD put to the side, what's happening with these single micron situation? And I believe everyone to each his or her their own, right? I like a broader spectrum because to me, it's like eating the whole apple rather than the clarified Mott's juice or maybe apple cider, but the whole apple. The more micro I have, the different flavors I can get into. But again, the market still decides a lot, and the market requires that as good as the hash is, it has to have the highest meltability. And really, those 3 microns is where it really stays between the 73, the 90, and the 120. So to make a compromise, I just combine these 3 and not all the heads, and I call mine broad spectrum. So that's a bigger chunk, a bigger slice, just not the whole apple.